Hi, I'm your host, Brent. Welcome to the Climate Guru, where we discuss pressing environmental issues, including with leading experts. Join us for insightful conversations to inform and inspire action in your everyday life. We were recently able to see these beautiful videos from the Artemis 2 spacecraft that just went on a trip around the moon and back to Earth. And the remarkable thing that we saw were the videos and photographs of Earth, this blue planet hanging in the darkness of space with just no life around it in any part of our solar system or in our galaxy or the other billions of galaxies in the known universe. This is the only planet that we know of that has life forms, and it's our home. It's called the Goldilocks planet because it's just the right distance away from the sun to make life possible. If it was a tiny bit closer, it would be too hot. If it was a tiny bit further away, it would be too cold. So it's in the perfect distance from the sun to make life possible on Earth as we know it. The Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago, the moon about the same time. It took almost 1 billion years for the first forms of life to be born in the oceans. Over time, life evolved into more multi-cell organisms, eventually dinosaurs, mammals, all the plants on Earth. We are a recent addition, even though we're descendant of mammals that survived the last major destruction of the Earth, which was 66 million years ago, and dinosaurs were wiped out by a large meteor. Mammals survived, and we evolved from mammals. Primates were here a few million years ago, and our ancestors, the early genus Homo, was here 2 million years ago, and we evolved from that. Humans have only been on Earth for 300,000 years in the form of Homo sapiens. So we must return to the wisdom that surely we were born with, because we're the result of 3 billion years of evolution, and we're the result of the evolution that created us. So this is a precious, miraculous planet that we have, that we evolved in, that we're part of, that we're genetically the same, made up of the same components of all other life forms, DNA, of molecules and atoms. This is our home. This is our life. And we must love it and appreciate it because the systems on Earth in which we evolved, that we relied upon, we still rely upon to survive. The air we breathe, where does it come from? Most of the air we breathe comes from phytoplankton, tiny plants in the upper layers of the ocean. More than half. The rest comes from land plants. Soil. We take soil for granted, but soil was created and is protected and stays healthy from microscopic organisms, from worms, from insects that created the soil out of organic matter and rocks and sand, continue to turn it and aerate to keep it healthy. 90% of the food that we eat comes from soil, and we rely upon organisms to keep these biomes healthy. What keeps land healthy? We talked about the soils. Forests are essential to maintain life on Earth. Forests moderate temperatures. Forests provide rainfall on land. Forests are the home of most species on Earth. So it's these life systems that we rely upon to survive, for our food, for our water, for the air that we breathe. And without these life systems, life wouldn't be possible. We can live without cities. We can live without technology. We can live without modern transportation. But we can't survive for a day without the basic life systems on Earth. So it's a very complex system that has evolved. And it's the array of animals that keep and maintain these systems alive and healthy. And it's up to us to keep the microbiology healthy and to keep our life-supporting systems functioning. Tragically, there's a huge loss of natural life on Earth. It's happened in particular in the last 100 years because of the effects of human encroachment on the natural world. More than 75% of the world's land is drastically affected by humans. 30 to 40% of our forests are deforested. This affects the ability of forests to moderate temperatures, to help create rainfall, not only where they are, but around the world. The oceans are losing huge amounts of fish species. 90% of large fish are gone because of overfishing. Cod fishing, for example, collapsed in the 1990s. 99% of them are gone. If you look at the animals that exist in the different continents, there's been a huge collapse of the number of animals that keep these systems healthy. Since the 1970s, the scientists have monitored populations of vertebrate. Vertebrate, of course, we're talking about mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, salamanders, and these are all over in each continent, and they have declined. The populations that they monitored, which were thousands and thousands of populations, they've declined by almost 70%, which is a shocking number. And so we're losing wildlife at an alarming rate because of the encroachment of human activities. The biggest problem is we reclaim natural areas, land, to create farms, to create ranches. We knock down the Amazon rainforests and other rainforests to create pastures for cattle ranching. More than 80% of the deforestation in the Amazon is from tearing down forests, burning forests to create cattle ranches for beef cattle. There are enormous parts of the tropical forests in the Congo and in Indonesia and in the Amazon where forests have been cut down to create huge plantations of monocrops. By monocrops, one tree, one species, it could be soy. In Southeast Asia in particular, it's oil palms, which are used in almost every food and cosmetic we know. So when the forests are torn down and you have what's called a monocrop, one species of tree, the soils become weakened and the biology, the animals and plants that form within that forest can't exist in a simple that has no diversity whatsoever. The earth is losing wetlands, fresh rivers and wetlands. They are what provides all of our fresh water, and they filter water. They take the contaminants out of water in the aquifer to keep it clean. Wetlands have been lost 85% around the world. That's how much we've lost of wetlands. And the animals and fish that survive in wetlands are among the most dangerous. Forests and oil and gas that take place in many forest areas. When roads come in, that's the beginning of the destruction of the forests. The oceans provide proteins for 3 billion people on Earth, and we have lost 90% of the large fish. Corals are one of the essential parts of the ocean. 25% of the marine species depend on corals to live. Corals, tragically, we've lost almost 50% of corals around the world because of the heating of the oceans. So when the atmosphere warms because of the greenhouse effect, because of these large amounts of emissions from industry, from transportation, also from agriculture, a lot of this heat, where does it go? It goes into the oceans. The oceans actually absorb more than 90% of the excess heat that humans generate on this planet, mainly from the greenhouse effect. If the oceans didn't absorb 90% of the excess heat, the planet would be much, much warmer, and life as we know it would be impossible. So what happens to the oceans? The oceans become acidic when this excess carbon is absorbed by the oceans. And acidic oceans affect the oceans in several ways. Increased acidity reduces oxygen in the oceans that all these marine organisms need to live. It also inhibits the growth of shells, forming organisms in the ocean, such as coral, phytoplankton, zooplankton, all shellfish, lobsters, and so on that we know of. So it's a real problem that the oceans are absorbing all this excess heat and excess carbon. We understand that different parts of the planet are losing biology at different rates. And probably the greatest losses have been monitored in Latin America and the Caribbean, where there's an astounding 90% of loss of biodiversity in these monitored areas in Latin America and the Caribbean. One of the other areas that are really seeing a huge decline in biodiversity is Africa and Southeast Asia, where 70% of biodiversity has gone. The North America, we're talking about perhaps 30% of our biodiversity is gone. Now, because they're gone forever, we estimate there's probably 10 million species of plants and animals on Earth, although some scientists say there could be hundreds of millions. And of the 10 million that we estimate live on Earth, plants and animals, we only have really discovered, studied, and identified only 2 million out of the 10 million. That's only 20%. About 18,000 new species are discovered each year. And scientists estimate there could be many more species than the 10 million that have been discovered. Of these, about 7.7 million are animals, and half of the animals are insects. Another million are algae, plants, fungi, mitochondria. And of the vertebrate species, of which mammals are a member, there's 63,000 known vertebrate species, mammals, reptiles, birds, fish, amphibians. And of invertebrate species like marine invertebrates, jellyfish, mollusks, there are about 1.3 million. Scientists tell us that 1 million out of the 10 million species that we know about are threatened. That's an enormous amount. And about half of these are plants and animals, and about half of these are insects. So the extinction rate, as we said, is 1,000 times greater than it was before humans began to adversely affect life forms. The extinction rate is one measure. Scientists also measure the patterns of migrations and how much territory have different animals have lost, where they live and migrate for food, for reproduction. And what is their range? Scientists have determined that many populations of animals in particular are in peril because their range has been reduced by claiming land for agriculture, by claiming it for cities, by turning it into pastures. So when the range of certain species are reduced, they can become endangered. That's one of the measurements that endangers. The other one is, what is the amount? What is the collective number of these species? How much have they been reduced? Not extinct, but how much have they been reduced, which puts them at risk of extinction. There's a natural rate of extinction on the earth that has taken place for millions of years before humans evolved. And we evolved in our present form only 300,000 years ago as Homo sapiens. There's a natural rate of extinction on Earth. We rely upon these organisms not only to moderate and keep the ecosystems that we rely upon healthy, the oceans, the air, the land, pastures, wetlands. They keep them alive and healthy. Not only do they do that, but they provide all the services that we need. It's up to us to use the intelligence and wisdom and what we evolved as human beings from this planet to preserve it, to keep it healthy as our home. What we have to remember is that our survival as a species, humans, depends on a functioning biodiverse world, a functioning world with all the ecosystems that provide the services upon which we rely to live. And all other life forms require. The air we breathe comes from the oceans and from land plants. The fresh water that we need and drink. We think the necessary things for life on Earth are what? Cities, roads, modern transportation, computers, technology, building cities. Those aren't the things that sustain our life. The most important places on the earth that make life possible are not cities, not countries, not economies. The Amazon rainforest, the Congo rainforest, the Southeast Asia forests, the boreal forests in northern latitudes of Canada, Russia, and the oceans. That's what makes life possible. And healthy biodiversity is the operating system of these systems on Earth. These are the planetary life support systems. And we are, as organisms, are absolutely dependent on other organisms. Humans are weak and dependent, as all other animals in the biosphere are weak and dependent. And as the famous biologist Edward O. Wilson said, the biosphere doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. And he said the organisms that surround us in such beautiful profusion are the product of 3.8 billion years of evolution by natural selection. And that's who we are. This is our home. And we have to protect this beautiful blue and white orb that's in the blackness of space. We have to protect it and keep it as our home. Thanks for tuning in to the Climate Guru podcast. Stay inspired, stay informed, and keep taking action for our planet's future. Until next time, and remember, together we can make a difference.